My name is Evan, and for the last 10 years, my family has seen me as a magic trick. They don't see the man, the writer, the son, or the brother. They see the name on the cover of a best-selling book, a name that somehow magically translates into a walking, talking ATM. To them, my success wasn't earned, it just happened. They call it the Midas touch, a term they use with a strange mix of pride and entitlement, as if my ability to turn words into gold was a genetic trait they all shared in, and were therefore owed a piece of. The truth, of course, is that my hands aren't gold. They're stained with ink and scarred from work, but they never saw that. They only saw the shine. This delusion was manageable for a while. It manifested in small ways at first. A cousin's car breaks down, and a call comes to me, not a mechanic. An aunt has a once-in-a-lifetime investment opportunity in essential oils, and suddenly I'm cornered at Thanksgiving dinner with a poorly printed brochure. I became the family's soft landing, their financial backstop, their get-out-of-jail-free card for poor decisions. Each request was framed as an emergency, a word that lost all meaning through overuse. I'd pay, I'd help, I'd sigh, and transfer the money, because it was easier than the fight, easier than the guilt trips that would inevitably follow a refusal. It was the price I paid, I told myself, for peace. But I wasn't buying peace. I was renting it, and the landlord was my own family's ever-growing sense of entitlement. The real tipping point, the one that began the slow, cold burn of resentment in my gut, was my brother, Leo. Leo is my opposite in every conceivable way. Where I am quiet and methodical, he is loud and impulsive. While I spent my 20s locked in a room with a keyboard, he spent his exploring every whim that drifted through his mind, funded by our parents. He was the creative spirit, the one who needed to find himself. I was just Evan, the reliable one, the boring one, the one who paid his own bills. At my 30th birthday dinner, surrounded by the trappings of my success, a restaurant I'd chosen, a bill I would undoubtedly pay, Leo, flushed with expensive wine I'd ordered, slapped me on the back. He laughed, a loud booming sound that made heads turn. He joked that I owed him for being my inspiration. He claimed his chaotic, dramatic life was the raw material for the dark, complex characters in my novels. He wasn't entirely wrong. I had certainly based a few villains on his particular brand of charming narcissism, but he wasn't asking for a thank you. He was demanding a finder's fee. He wanted me to fund his latest dream, a high-concept fusion taco restaurant. He had a name, a flimsy business plan, sketched on a napkin, and a bottomless well of confidence, not in his idea, but in my wallet. I laughed it off, deflecting with a joke of my own, but the demand lingered in the air, ugly and sharp. The final straw wasn't Leo's demand, though. I was used to his nonsense. The final straw came from my parents. It came a few months later, at a Sunday dinner at their house, the house I grew up in, the house they owned outright thanks to a mortgage I'd helped them pay off years ago as a thank you gift. My mother, Carol, served the roast, her face beaming with pride. My father, Mark, cleared his throat, tapping his glass with a fork. It was an announcement. They were so proud of Leo, they said. He had such drive, such passion, and they were going to help him achieve his dream. They were going to refinance their house, their debt-free, secure home, and give him the money for the restaurant. I stared at them, the fork frozen halfway to my mouth. The noise in the room seemed to fade to a dull buzz. They said it so proudly, so casually. And then my mother turned to me, her smile unwavering, and delivered the killing blow. "And we know, Evan," she said, her voice full of a sweet, maddening certainty, "that if anything goes wrong, you'll be there to make sure we're okay. You always are." There it was, the Midas touch, not a gift, but a curse. A safety net woven from my own sweat and sleepless nights, now stretched out beneath my brother's riskiest, most ill-conceived fantasy. They weren't just risking their own security, they were gambling with mine, assuming I would fold, that I would cover their losses without a word. They had just leveraged their entire future on a bet that I would continue to be the family's silent benefactor. In that moment, something inside me didn't just break, it hardened. The warmth I felt for them, the sense of duty, it all flash-froze into something cold, clear, and sharp as glass. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I didn't plead with them to see reason. The man who wrote angry, verbose characters fell completely silent. I just nodded slowly, a polite, empty smile on my face. I chewed my roast beef, which now tasted like ash. I listened to Leo excitedly describe his plans for volcano-infused habanero aioli. And when the dinner was over, I stood up, hugged my mother, shook my father's hand, and said, "This is a big step. We should all talk about it again next Sunday. In fact, I have a little presentation I'd like to share. A sort of financial overview." They beamed, thinking I was about to offer my support, my money, my blessing. They thought the magic money machine was finally ready to dispense the grand prize. They had no idea I was about to show them exactly how the trick was done. The drive home from my parents' house was a silent film. The city lights smeared across my windshield. The radio was off, and the only sound was the low hum of the engine. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white mountains on a pale range. It wasn't a hot, explosive anger. That would have been a relief. This was different. It was a cold, creeping clarity, the kind that settles in after a high fever breaks. The fever of familial obligation, of a decade spent trying to be the good son, had finally passed, and what was left was a stark, chilling reality. I wasn't a son or a brother to them anymore. I was a resource, a utility. I was the emergency fund, the 401k, the insurance policy against bad decisions. The love was conditional, tied directly to my net worth. The pride they felt wasn't for my accomplishments, it was for the lifestyle those accomplishments afforded them access to. I pulled into my garage, the door closing with a heavy thud that sealed me in the darkness. I just sat there for a long time, the engine ticking as it cooled, and my mind, the one that built worlds and spun narratives for a living, began to do what it does best. It started to pull on threads, not of fiction, but of memory. The slideshow I'd promised them started to build itself in my head, not as a tool of revenge, but as a necessary, brutal education. The fall semester at the University of Evan was about to begin, and the curriculum was going to be pain, sacrifice, and the real cost of a dream. The first flashback hit me right there in the driver's seat. It wasn't a memory of glory, but of grime. I was 23, living in a shoebox apartment in the worst part of town, the kind of place where the symphony of the city was a nightly chorus of sirens and arguing neighbors. My office was a wobbly card table shoved into a corner of the living room. My chair a cast-off from a diner that had gone out of business. I could see the pile of papers on that table so clearly. A stack of rejection letters, 100 of them, maybe more. Each one a neat, polite little knife in the heart. Thank you for your submission, but it's not the right fit for us at this time. While the premise is interesting, we're going to have to pass. We wish you the best of luck in placing your work elsewhere. I remembered a specific phone call from that era. I'd called my dad Mark, excited because an agent had requested a full manuscript for the first time. It was a flicker of hope in a vast darkness. I tried to explain what a big deal it was, the validation, the possibility. He listened for a moment before cutting me off. "That's nice, son," he'd said, his voice distracted. "Listen, your brother Leo wrecked his car. Nothing serious, but he needs a couple thousand for the repairs. You got anything you can spare from that little writing hobby of yours?" A hobby. He called it a hobby. The thing that I was pouring my entire soul into, the reason I ate instant noodles 5 nights a week, was a little hobby. I didn't have the money, of course. My bank account was a wasteland. When I told him that, his disappointment was audible. "Well," he'd sighed, "I guess we'll figure it out. You really should think about getting a real job, Evan. This writing thing isn't paying the bills." The agent ended up passing on the manuscript. My father never asked about it again. Another memory surfaced, this one more visceral. I was 26, and the stress had finally eaten its way through my stomach lining. I woke up in the middle of the night with a pain so sharp, so blinding, it felt like I was being stabbed from the inside out. I managed to call an ambulance, my voice a weak croak. In the emergency room, the doctor told me I had a bleeding ulcer, brought on by a combination of extreme stress, poor diet, and way too much caffeine. They hooked me up to an IV, pumped me full of medication, and the pain slowly subsided into a dull, throbbing ache. I was scared. Lying there in that sterile white room, I felt profoundly alone. I called my mom, Carol, the next morning. I told her what happened. Her response? "Oh, honey, you're always so dramatic. An ulcer? People get those. Just try to relax a little. Your brother is thinking of going to culinary school in Italy. Isn't that exciting?" She changed the subject. My physical agony was an inconvenience to her, a downer on the much more interesting topic of Leo's next adventure. I still have the bill from that hospital visit. $8,742. I paid it off in installments over 2 years, long after I'd signed my first book deal. It was the first major purchase I made with my magic money. Not a fancy car or a big house, just the cost of my own ambition trying to kill me. Then came the memory of the first big check, the one that changed everything. It was an advance for my 4th book, the one that finally broke through, $500,000. I remember seeing the number and feeling like I couldn't breathe. It wasn't real. I stared at it for an hour before I deposited it, terrified the bank teller would laugh at me. That money wasn't for luxuries, it was for survival. It was a buffer against ever having to be in that kind of fear and desperation again. It was my freedom. The first call I made was to my parents. I told them I was paying off their mortgage. They wept with joy. It was the proudest moment of my life. The second call came a week later from them. It was my dad. "Son," he began, a new warmth in his voice, the one I'd been chasing my whole life. "You know that old Mustang I've always wanted? There's a 67 for sale down the road, now that you're doing so well." It wasn't a question. It was an assumption. I bought him the car, then it was a new kitchen for my mom. Then it was Leo's business idea for a bespoke t-shirt company that folded after 6 months and left me $30,000 poorer. Each time, I gave in. I was so high on the feeling of being able to provide, so desperate to maintain that new warm tone in my father's voice, that I didn't see the pattern forming. I wasn't their son who had made good. I was their golden goose, and they were getting very comfortable with the idea of a steady supply of golden eggs. The final image that solidified in my mind was not a single event, but a montage of absences. The life I didn't live for 5 solid years. My cousin Sarah's wedding, where I was supposed to be a groomsman, missed because I was on a crushing deadline for a rewrite that my editor demanded. My grandfather's final birthday, which I had to attend via a crackly video call from a hotel room in another city during a book tour. The simple things like weekend trips with friends, dating, just living. I had sacrificed my entire youth on the altar of my ambition, and my family, especially Leo, had been living the life I'd put on hold. He'd gone to music festivals, traveled through Europe, dated a string of beautiful women, all on our parents' dime, which I was beginning to realize was indirectly my dime. He was living the life of a rich man's son, and I was the rich man he didn't even have the decency to thank. Sitting there in my car in the quiet dark of my own success, the last vestiges of my naive sense of duty withered and died. The anger was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. This wasn't about revenge anymore. Revenge was a hot, messy emotion. This was about accounting. It was about justice. It was about drawing a line so deep and so clear that no one could ever pretend they didn't see it again. I got out of the car, walked into my house, and went straight to my office. I didn't turn on the lights. I just stood in the center of the room, the moonlight striping the floor. On the walls were framed posters of my book covers, translated into a dozen languages. On the shelves were the literary awards, gleaming dully in the dark. It was a monument to a war they had never witnessed. I picked up my phone. I didn't call my parents or my brother. I called the one person who had been in the trenches with me from the beginning. My agent, Julian. He was more than an agent. He was a friend, a mentor, the one who saw the promise in my work when no one else did. He answered on the second ring, his voice groggy. "Evan, it's 1 in the morning. Everything okay?" "They're going to refinance the house, Julian," I said, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. I explained the dinner, the announcement. My mother's smiling, deadly words. I told him everything. For a long moment there was silence on the other end of the line. Then Julian, a man who was normally the epitome of calm professionalism, swore. A single, sharp, violent word. "Those ungrateful," he started, then cut himself off. "Evan, you can't let them. That house is their only real asset. Leo will burn through that money in a year, I guarantee it." "I know," I said. "That's why I'm going to stop them." I told them I was preparing a presentation for next Sunday. "A presentation?" "The full accounting," I said. The plan now fully formed in my mind. I'm going to show them the bill. Every late night, every rejection, every drop of blood, sweat, and tears that built this life they think is a goddamn magic show. Julian was quiet again, but this time it was a different kind of silence. It was thoughtful. "A slideshow is good, Evan," he said finally, his voice now crisp and focused. "It's dramatic. It's what you do. But it's not enough. Showing them the past won't protect your future. If you're going to do this, you do it all the way. You don't just build a case, you build a fortress. It's time to stop being the son and start being the CEO of your own life." He was right. A presentation was just words and pictures. It would shame them, maybe, but it wouldn't fundamentally change the dynamic. It wouldn't protect me. To do that, I needed more than a PowerPoint. I needed a lawyer. I needed a financial advisor. I needed to take the Midas touch they so admired and use it to build walls of gold so high they could never climb them again. The decision was made, the war had begun, and I, the quiet, reliable writer, was about to draft my masterpiece, the declaration of my own independence. The week that followed was a masterclass in controlled fury. On the surface, I was the same Evan. I answered my emails, I worked on the outline for my next novel, I even took a call from my mother in which I politely confirmed our dinner for Sunday. But beneath that placid surface, I was a man orchestrating a quiet, meticulous coup. My life, my career, my finances, they were about to undergo a radical restructuring. Julian's words echoed in my head. Start being the CEO of your own life. I was about to stage the most aggressive corporate takeover imaginable, and the company was me. My first call was to Julian, who had already compiled a short list for me. He gave me the name of a man named Alistair Finch, a forensic accountant who worked with high net worth individuals, and a woman named Sarah Chen, a lawyer who specialized in asset protection and trust formation. These weren't the friendly, small-town professionals my parents used. These were sharks. My sharks. My meeting with Alistair was in a sterile, glass-walled office downtown that smelled of money and ambition. He was a small, neat man with eyes that seemed to see everything in spreadsheets. I didn't give him the emotional backstory. I didn't talk about my family's entitlement or my brother's taco fantasy. I just laid out the objective. I want a complete audited history of my career, I told him. From my first dollar earned to my last. I want to know my effective hourly wage for the first 5 years. I want every expense, every investment, every tax dollar accounted for. I want to build a financial biography. Alistair didn't blink. He just nodded and said, "That is a fascinating project. Data tells a story. What story do you want this data to tell?" "The truth," I said. For the next 3 days, my office became a hurricane of paper. Alistair's team and I unearthed a decade's worth of my life. We dug up the shoeboxes of old receipts I'd kept for tax purposes. We pulled bank statements going back to an account that had been closed for 8 years. We logged every royalty statement, every foreign rights sale, every speaking fee. We compiled the 127 rejection letters. We found the digital records of my early manuscripts, time-stamped, showing the thousands of hours I'd spent editing and rewriting. We even tracked down the hospital and ambulance bills for the ulcer. Alistair's genius was in how he organized it. He wasn't just compiling numbers. He was building a narrative. He created a chart that showed my income for the first 5 years of my writing career. It was a flat line at zero, which then dipped sharply into the red as we factored in expenses, contest entry fees, editing software, research materials, and the big one, the cost of living with no income. Then the line spiked vertically with my first big advance. But he didn't stop there. He then overlaid that chart with another line, my financial support to my family. It started as a small drain right after the spike, then grew into a steady, significant river flowing out of my accounts. When he put the two charts together on his screen, the story was undeniable. I had climbed out of a massive hole, and the first thing I did was let my family start digging me a new one. While Alistair was excavating my past, Sarah Chen was building my future. My meeting with her was even more direct. She was sharp, efficient, and had zero patience for sentimentality. "Your friend Julian explained the broad strokes," she said, cutting right to the chase. "You have a family that views you as an unsecured line of credit. Our job is to secure it, permanently." I thought I knew about money. I knew how to earn it, save it, invest it. I was wrong. Sarah spoke a different language, a language of trusts, LLCs, and corporate veils. She explained that as a sole proprietor, Evan the man and Evan the author were legally and financially the same person. My personal assets and my business assets were all in one big vulnerable pile. She proposed a plan that was as elegant as it was ruthless. First, we would create Evan Maxwell Inc., an S corporation. My intellectual property, the copyrights to all my books, past, present, and future, would be transferred to this corporation. I would no longer be the author. I would be an employee of the corporation. My income would be a salary, paid by the corporation to me. Second, we would establish an irrevocable trust. The shares of Evan Maxwell Inc. would be placed into this trust. The trust's purpose was to manage the assets for the benefit of its beneficiary, me. But the key word was irrevocable. Once the assets were in, they were incredibly difficult to get out. They were protected from creditors, from lawsuits, and most importantly, from familial guilt trips. Third, we would form a separate LLC to hold my physical assets, my house, my car, my art collection. I wouldn't own my house. The LLC would own my house, and I would have an exclusive use agreement. It sounded complicated, like a shell game, but Sarah explained the logic with chilling clarity. If your brother's restaurant fails, she said, and your parents default on their new mortgage, the bank will come after their assets. If they try to claim you are their financial safety net, or if they try to sue you for support, they will discover they cannot touch you. They would be suing a corporation whose assets are held in a trust that is legally firewalled from your personal finances. Your salary is your own, but the vast majority of your wealth, the Midas touch as you call it, will be untouchable. It will be a fortress. The process was a whirlwind of paperwork. I signed more documents in 2 days than I had in the last 10 years. Each signature felt like laying a stone in a great wall. I was severing the financial cord that bound me to my family's expectations. It was terrifying and exhilarating. This was the B-plot that Julian had mentioned. Not just showing them, but protecting myself. This was my hidden leverage. The slideshow would be the emotional blow, the story of the past. The corporate structure was the practical reality, the unbreachable wall of the future. The plan was almost complete. Alistair had finished his report, a 100-page document that was the definitive, non-fiction story of my success. Sarah had filed the paperwork for the corporation and the trust. The silent takeover of my own life was nearly complete. All that was left was the final act. Then on Thursday afternoon, the phone rang. It was Leo. His voice was breezy, confident. "Hey bro," he said. "So I found the perfect spot for the restaurant. It's got a great vibe, but the landlord wants a deposit to hold it. It's $5,000. The refi money won't be through for a couple of weeks, so I was hoping you could just float me the cash. You'll get it back as soon as the bank comes through." It was the moment of truth, the first test of the new reality. The old Evan would have sighed, complained a little, and then sent the money. It was easier, it was expected. But the old Evan was gone, dismantled and reassembled into something stronger. I took a breath. "No, Leo," I said. My voice was calm, level, not angry, not apologetic, just factual. There was a stunned silence on the other end. "What? What do you mean, no?" "I mean, no, I can't give you the money," I replied, choosing my words carefully. "My funds are all allocated right now." This was, technically, the truth. My personal bank account now contained only my salary. The rest was locked away in the fortress Sarah had built. Leo's confusion quickly curdled into indignation. "Not available? You're a millionaire. What are you talking about? It's $5,000, Evan, not a new car." "I'm sorry, Leo. The answer is no." "This is ridiculous," he sputtered. "What's wrong with you? I'll just have Mom and Dad call you. They'll talk some sense into you." He hung up. 30 minutes later, my mother called. Her voice was laced with a concerned disappointment that was a far more effective weapon than Leo's anger. "Evan, honey, what's this Leo is telling me? You know how important this is to him. It's just a small loan." "It's not a loan, Mom. We both know it's a gift. And I'm not giving it," I said, my voice still steady. "We can discuss everything on Sunday. I think my presentation will make things very clear." "Presentation? Evan, this is your brother, not a board meeting. I don't understand why you're being so cold and secretive. This isn't like you." "You're right, Mom," I said, and a genuine sadness touched me for a moment. "It isn't. I'll see you on Sunday." I hung up the phone. The first shot had been fired. The enemy was confused, their supply lines cut. They were starting to realize that the magic money machine was not just glitching, it had been shut down, and they had no idea how to turn it back on. The panic was just beginning to set in. The real show was yet to come. The days leading up to Sunday were a strange sort of Cold War. The silence from my family was louder than any argument. My mother, usually a frequent caller, went radio silent. My dad didn't send his customary weekly email with links to classic car auctions. Leo, I'm sure, was fuming, but he didn't try to contact me again. They were closing ranks, forming a bewildered and indignant circle. They were trying to punish me with their silence, to make me feel the chill of their disapproval, hoping I would crack and come crawling back with an apology and an open wallet. It was a tactic that would have worked on the old Evan. The old Evan craved their approval, their warmth, and would have done almost anything to get it back. But the new Evan, the CEO of Evan Maxwell Incorporated, found the silence peaceful. It was the quiet before the storm, and I was the one holding the lightning. The manipulation, when it came, was clumsy and desperate. It started with my Aunt Patty, my mother's sister, who called me on Friday night. "Evan, dear," she began, her voice dripping with faux concern. "Your mother is so worried about you. She says you're not yourself. Is everything all right? You know you can talk to me." I saw the play immediately. They had sent in a proxy, a flanking maneuver designed to gather intelligence and apply guilt from a different angle. "I'm fine, Aunt Patty," I said, keeping my tone light and breezy. "Just busy with work. We're all getting together on Sunday to catch up. It'll be great." I gave her nothing. No information, no emotional reaction, just a polite brick wall. She tried a few more times to pry, mentioning how much my parents had sacrificed for me, how proud they were, before giving up with a frustrated sigh. The next day, it was Leo's turn again, but he tried a different approach. He sent me a text message. It was a photo of the two of us as kids, maybe 8 and 10 years old, grinning with our arms around each other's shoulders. The caption read, "Remember when we were a team? Don't let money change you, man. It's just paper. The sheer breathtaking hypocrisy of it almost made me laugh out loud. Leo, the man who had never seen me as anything but money for the last decade, was now accusing me of being changed by it. He was trying to appeal to a sense of nostalgia, to a brotherly bond he himself had corroded with years of casual exploitation. This wasn't an olive branch. It was a weaponized memory. I didn't reply. My silence was the only answer that mattered. It was a power they didn't understand. They were used to my arguments, my capitulations, my frustrated sighs. They had a script for all of those responses. They had no script for this calm, unbreachable quiet. The power shift was palpable. For my entire adult life, they had held the emotional high ground. They were the arbiters of my guilt and my worthiness. Their approval was the currency I worked for. By refusing to engage, by refusing to play the game by their rules, I had seized that ground. They were now the ones who were anxious, the ones who were uncertain. They were the ones calling in reinforcements and trying desperate, transparent ploys. They were beginning to understand that they were not coming to a family dinner on Sunday. They were coming to a reckoning. They just didn't know the scale of it yet. The night before the presentation, I sat in my office and went through the slides one last time. Alistair had helped me distill his 100-page report into a brutal 20-minute visual narrative. Sarah had reviewed it to ensure every claim was backed by irrefutable fact. It was perfect. It was cold. It was the truth. As I looked at the final slide, a simple black screen with white text, I felt a pang of something that wasn't anger or satisfaction. It was grief. I was mourning the family I wished I had, the one that could have celebrated my success without seeing it as their resource. I was mourning the relationships that were about to be irrevocably burned to the ground so that something new, something honest could potentially be built on the ashes, or maybe not. Maybe it would just be ashes. But even that was better than the slow-motion poison of the last 10 years. I closed the laptop, the fortress was built, the army was assembled. The plan was in motion. They thought they were coming to dinner to finally cash in their golden ticket. They were about to find out the ticket was a bill, and it was long past due. The power had shifted. The magic money machine was about to do its final trick. It was going to disappear. Sunday arrived, gray and overcast, a fitting backdrop for the day's proceedings. I drove to my parents' house, the same route I had driven 1,000 times before. But this time I wasn't Evan, the son, coming for a family meal. I was a visiting dignitary from a foreign power, arriving to negotiate the terms of a new treaty. I had a briefcase with me. In it was my laptop and a small, powerful projector. The moment I walked through the door, the tension was a physical presence. It was in the stiff way my mother hugged me, the way my father's handshake was a little too firm, his eyes not quite meeting mine. Leo was already there, slouched on the sofa, scrolling through his phone with a sullen look on his face. He grunted a hey in my direction without looking up. The air was thick with unspoken accusations. They had clearly coordinated their strategy, the cold shoulder. They thought their collective disapproval would be enough to make me break. We ate dinner in near silence. The clinking of silverware on plates was unnaturally loud. My mother would occasionally try to start a bland conversation about the weather or a neighbor, but it would die out after a few sentences. They were waiting for me to crack, to apologize, to explain myself. I just ate my meal calmly and deliberately. I was letting the silence do its work. I was letting them stew in their own uncertainty. When the plates were cleared, I didn't wait for an invitation. I stood up. "All right," I said, my voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "If everyone could come into the living room, I have that presentation I wanted to share." My father sighed, a long, theatrical sound of a man being deeply put upon. "Evan, is this really necessary?" "It's Sunday dinner." "It's more than necessary, Dad," I replied, my tone leaving no room for argument. "It's essential." I set up the projector on the coffee table, aiming it at a large blank wall. They gathered reluctantly, my parents on the sofa, Leo in the armchair, his arms crossed defensively over his chest. Their expressions were a mixture of annoyance and weary condescension. They thought this was going to be a lecture, a boring, self-important display. I clicked the remote. The first slide lit up the wall. It was a high-resolution scan of the publisher's check for my first major advance. The number was stark and huge. "This is what you see," I began, my voice even and measured. "This is the Midas touch. The moment the magic happened. You all remember this day. You were so proud, so happy." I let the image hang there for a moment, letting them remember the celebration, the joy. I clicked again. The next slide was a grainy photo of my first apartment. The cramped, squalid room with the card table. "This is the place where that check was earned," I said. The rent was $600 a month. That check represents 5 years of work before it was ever printed. 5 years of my life spent in rooms like this. Click, a collage of scanned rejection letters filled the screen. 127 rejections, I said, gesturing to the wall, for my first 3 novels, the ones none of you have ever asked to read. Each one of these was a door slammed in my face. Click, a photo of my desk, taken with my phone at 3 in the morning. It was a landscape of chaos, stacks of books, manuscript pages covered in red ink, a constellation of empty coffee mugs. 18-hour workdays, I stated, not with self-pity but with the cold finality of a courtroom exhibit. 7 days a week, for nearly 2 years straight to meet the deadline for the book that would eventually earn that check. Leo shifted in his chair, a flicker of something annoyance, boredom on his face. My mother was staring at her hands. My father's jaw was tight. Click. The next slide was a close-up, a medical bill from the city hospital's emergency department. The reason for visit was listed, gastric ulcer with hemorrhage. The total amount due was circled in red, $8,742. This, I said, my voice dropping slightly, is the bill for the stress, for the caffeine, and the sleepless nights. I was 26 years old. Mom, you told me I was being dramatic. Dad, you were busy helping Leo look for a new car, because he'd gotten another speeding ticket. My mother looked up, her face pale. Flicker of defensive anger flashed in her eyes, but it was quickly extinguished by a wave of something else. Shame. Click. The next slide was Alistair's masterpiece, a simple, brutal spreadsheet. One column listed the 8,760 hours I had worked over those 5 years. The next column showed my total income for that period, negative $22,450, after factoring in basic living expenses and work-related costs. The final column was the most damning. Effective hourly wage, $2.76. For 5 years, I explained, I paid to work. I went into debt to pursue this hobby. While Leo was in Italy finding himself at a culinary school that you paid for, I was hemorrhaging money and, as it turns out, blood. Click. A simple list. Family support rendered post-success. It was a detailed, dated list of every major loan and gift. My dad's Mustang, my mom's kitchen, Leo's failed t-shirt business, the down payment on his condo. The total at the bottom was a staggering 6-figure number. I turned to face them. The arrogance was gone. The indignation had vanished. In its place was a creeping horror. They were finally seeing it. Not the money, but the cost. The Midas touch, I said, my voice quiet but carrying across the room, is a myth. It's a convenient story you tell yourselves so you don't have to see this. The sacrifice, the pain, the years of my life I burned to build this career, a career you have treated like a public utility. I took a breath. You want to refinance this house, a house I helped pay for, to fund Leo's restaurant. You want to take the one piece of security you have and bet it on a whim. And you have the audacity to assume that I will be your safety net, that my life's work is your insurance policy. I looked directly at my parents. That stops tonight. I clicked to the final slide. It was a black screen with plain white text. It said, Evan Maxwell Inc., an S corporations, all assets held in irrevocable trust. As of this week, I announced, I am no longer a person, financially speaking. I am a corporation. My work, my home, my wealth, it is all owned by a legal entity that you cannot touch. I am an employee of that corporation. I draw a salary. The rest is locked away, protected. The bank is closed. The Midas touch is gone. I turned off the projector. The silence that filled the room was absolute, profound. It was the sound of a world breaking. Leo was staring at the blank wall, his mouth slightly open, the color drained from his face. My father looked old, shrunken. My mother was openly crying, silent tears streaming down her face. For the first time, they saw the man, not the magic money machine. They saw the cost, the real cost, and they finally understood that the bill had just been delivered to their table, and it was one they would have to pay themselves. I packed my laptop and the projector back into the briefcase, the clicks of the latches echoing in the cavernous silence. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel smug. I felt a profound, aching sadness, and an equally profound sense of relief. The weight of their expectations, a burden I had carried for a decade, was finally gone. I stood up, the briefcase in my hand. I love you all, I said, and it was the truth, as complicated and painful as that truth was. But my life's work is not your emergency fund. My sacrifices are not your safety net. If you decide to go through with this refinancing, you will be doing it alone. The consequences, for better or for worse, will be entirely your own. I looked at Leo. His face was a mask of disbelief, the dawning horror of a man who just watched his winning lottery ticket burst into flames. There is no inspiration fee, Leo, I said, my voice soft but firm. The only person I owe for my stories is me. I walked to the door. No one said a word. No one tried to stop me. I let myself out, closing the door quietly behind me, leaving them in the ruins of the comfortable fantasy I had just demolished. As I walked to my car, the overcast sky finally broke, and a light rain began to fall. It felt like the world was washing itself clean. I got in, started the engine, and drove away, not looking back. The treaty had been signed. I was finally a sovereign nation. In the weeks that followed, the silence from my family continued, but it was a different kind of silence now. It wasn't the aggressive, punishing silence of before. It was the bewildered, shell-shocked silence of people forced to confront a reality they had long ignored. They didn't call. They didn't text. It was as if the Evan they knew had died at that dinner, and they hadn't yet figured out who this new person was. The first real consequence of my declaration came about a month later. I heard through my Aunt Patty, who called me under the guise of wanting a book recommendation, a transparently thin excuse to fish for information, that my parents had not gone through with the refinancing. The bank, upon reviewing their age, income, and the utter lack of a coherent business plan from Leo, had been hesitant. Without the implicit guarantee of my fortune as a backstop, the loan was deemed too risky. Leo's dream of a fusion taco empire died not with a bang, but with a loan officer's polite but firm rejection letter. I felt a quiet, grim satisfaction. It wasn't about punishing him. It was about reality finally asserting itself. Leo, I was told, did not take it well. He moved out of his condo, the one I'd helped him get, and back into my parents' house. The golden child had returned to the nest, but the nest was no longer lined with gold. For the first time in his adult life, he had to get a real job. He ended up as a line cook at a chain steakhouse, a humbling descent from his imagined throne as a restaurateur. The irony was not lost on me. My relationship with my parents entered a long, frozen winter. The few times we spoke were stilted and awkward, full of unspoken words. But slowly, very slowly, a thaw began. It started with an email from my father. It was short. It just said, "I reread your first book. I get it now." It wasn't an apology, not in the way most people would define it, but for my father, a man who communicated through action and silence, it was a seismic admission. My mother was next. She left a voicemail on my phone one afternoon. She didn't mention the dinner or the money. She just talked about a memory from when I was a kid, how I used to spend hours in my room, writing stories in a spiral notebook. "I never understood what you were doing in there," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry I never tried to understand." I didn't rush back into their arms. The damage was too deep, the patterns too ingrained. But we started again, tentatively. We started building something new, something based not on obligation or entitlement, but on a fragile, emerging respect. Our conversations were no longer about what they needed from me, but about my work, my life, my actual thoughts and feelings. They were finally getting to know their son, the man, not the brand. As for me, I felt a lightness I hadn't realized was possible. The constant low-grade anxiety of being the family's financial first responder was gone. My creativity, which had been feeling strained and brittle, returned with a new vitality. I wrote with a freedom I hadn't felt since before I was successful. My work became sharper, more honest. I was no longer writing to maintain a lifestyle or to please a market. I was writing for myself again. I was writing because it was who I was. Julian said it was the best work of my career. My life is quieter now and infinitely richer. The fortress I built around my finances became the foundation for a more authentic life. I learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your family is to force them to stand on their own 2 feet. You have to teach people how to treat you, and sometimes the lesson has to be severe. Not for your sake, but for theirs. They saw my success as a magic trick, a gift from the heavens that they were entitled to share. They never understood that success isn't a gift. It's a bill. It's an invoice for thousands of hours of solitude, for years of sacrifice, for a relentless, soul-crushing belief in yourself when no one else does. My Midas touch was never magic. It was simply the result of paying that bill in full over and over again until the work was done. And the greatest luxury my fortune has ever bought me was the power to finally declare that my account was settled. So let me ask you, have you ever been the successful one in your circle? The one everyone assumes has it easy. The one they turn to when they need something, without ever asking what it cost you to get there. Every family, every group of friends seems to have one. If that person is you, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Tell me your story in the comments below. I genuinely like to read it. And if this story resonated with you, if you understand the price of a dream, do me a favor and hit that like button and subscribe for more. It turns out building a fortress is hard work, and it's always good to know you're not in it alone. Thanks for listening.